welcome to the GSMC Book Review Podcast, brought to you by the GSMC Podcast Network. I am your host, Sarah. Very happy to be with you on this last Tuesday of September. No. Next Tuesday is still September, because it'll be September 30th, so I lied to you just then. But we're very close to the end of September, which is crazy, because pretty sure it was just like 1985 last week. Not even January, but 1985. Yeah. As we get started, I do want to remind you, as I always do, to please like, follow, and subscribe on whatever platform you're either listening to or watching this episode on. As I keep saying, it really does help to get the podcast out to more readers such as yourselves. If you would like to help in another way, you can do so by going to gsmcpodcast.net. There you can leave a tip, a donation, I don't know, however you want to look at it. Buy me a cup of coffee, contribute to my reading habit, whatever it is, however you want to look at it. And it helps not only this podcast, but the network as a whole. And all of your support is always very, very much appreciated, no matter what form that support takes. So if that's sharing on social media, if that's liking on social media, liking on the platform that you're listening or watching on, or leaving a tip by going to gsmcpodcast.net, it is always very greatly appreciated, and I thank you from the bottom of my heart for all the support you've given the podcast over the years. Again, it's gsmcpodcast.net. How is your week going so far? We are having some lovely, lovely weather right now. It's still warm during the day, maybe hot-ish, but not too hot. And then I just took the dogs for a walk a little bit ago, and it wasn't cold. Like, I didn't need sleeves, but it was cool, and I love that. I love fall because the nights start getting colder and it's still warm during the day. I love this time of year, so I'm very happy about the weather. And yes, I am talking about the weather because I am old. Give me a break. One of my students yesterday was telling me about her teacher, and this teacher, she says, she was upset with this teacher. I don't remember exactly why, just something frustrated her about this teacher. And she said, and she's really old. She's like 50. I said, oh, okay. And I just left it at that. The student is 12. And I remember at 12 thinking anything older than about 25 was old. So that made me laugh, but is beside the point. It just occurred to me as I was talking about being old by talking about the weather. Let's instead talk about a book. I am talking this week to author Nick Kolakowski about his book, Where the Bones Lie. We are into mystery, crime fiction, noir, and let me go ahead and give you a description of this book. For Dash Fuller, Hollywood's underbelly is home. He's spent years making the film industry's worst secrets disappear, and it's left him a cynical burnout with a taste for bourbon and self-loathing. But when a young woman comes to him with a peculiar request, Dash sees a chance at redemption. Madeline Ironwood is the daughter of Ken Ironwood, a notorious smuggler and a murderer who disappeared 20 years ago. Ken's skeleton has just been discovered in a barrel at the bottom of a dried-up lake, and Madeline wants to know who killed him. Dash agrees to help, and as this desperate daughter and jaded cynic claw their way through a world of sun-bleached secrets, crooked cops, and Hollywood thugs, they soon uncover a conspiracy involving some of LA's most powerful people. Get ready for a fast-paced, darkly funny thriller with a twist you won't see coming. I like this sentence. They claw their way through a world of sun-bleached secrets, crooked cops, and Hollywood thugs. If that doesn't intrigue you, then, maybe you're not a fan of this type of book. But I think it's great wordplay, and I think it's a good description of a lot of what happens in this book. As I said, this is crime fiction, but it's a mystery. It's not crime fiction from the point of view of like a cop investigating a crime. Dash is not even a PI, which we sometimes get. He's a Hollywood fixer, which is a character that I have not encountered as often in books. He has his own demons and his own past, and he's working through some of that in this. And Madeline and her plea for help kind of help him with some of that. She's got her own demons, and she's working through a lot of that. I mean, obviously, the bones of her father have just been discovered, and he was not a great guy to begin with. So they've both got their pasts. They're both trying to work through some things, and they go on quite the series of events that help them to maybe start working through those things. And their relationship allows them to play off of each other and kind of sort through some of that. So there's a lot of different elements of the book and the characters that are great, that are compelling. So let's let Nick talk about those characters and those events. Again, the book is Where the Bones Lie. The author is Nick Kolakowski. Hi, Nick. Welcome to the podcast.
Thank you so much. I'm really glad to be here.
Thank you for being here. I'm excited to talk to you about the book Where the Bones Lie. Before we get to that, though, if you would take just a moment to introduce yourself, let my listeners get to know you a bit.
Sure. I'm a crime and horror author. I've been publishing novels for about and short stories for about 10 years or so. I'm a nominee of both the Anthony and the Derringer Awards. Where the Bones Lie is my first traditional mystery, but I've written a bunch of heist novels, including one called Love and Bullets, and a bunch of horror novels, including Groundhog Slay, Absolute Unit, and a few others. And I love talking all things crime, heist, mystery related, so I'm really happy to be here.
Yeah. We're not here to talk about Groundhog Slay, but just give me the quick elevator pitch. Is it like a Groundhog's Day scenario, but with horror?
Yeah, it is. It's about a Friday the 13th style masked killer who lurks around a summer camp in the 80s, who finds out that he is stuck in a time loop and forced to relive the same night over and over, and gives up killing. He grows sick of it and remorseful, but everyone meanwhile is trying to kill him. It's a horror comedy.
Wow. Okay. Yeah. I'm not, horror isn't my number one genre, but I'm actually intrigued by
Hmm.
that.
It's more on the funny scale than the
Right.
horror scale. So
Right.
yeah.
Yeah.
Yeah,
That,
yeah,
that's the way I would lean. So, all right.
yeah, yeah.
Okay. So Where the Bones Lie, can you give
Mhm.
an overview of the story?
So, Where the Bones Lie is a mystery set in LA, and it centers on it's a two-hander, as they say in Hollywood parlance. And one of those two hands is Dash, who is a former Hollywood fixer. So he's the guy who, if you're a film star and you accidentally kill somebody in your expansive backyard at 3 a.m. He's the guy who shows up with a car with a big trunk and a shovel to handle it for you. He's given up that lifestyle, and he is desperately trying to make it as a stand-up comedian when he runs into Madeline, who is the other hand in this particular mystery. And she is the daughter of Ken Ironwood, who is probably the most fictional, notorious smuggler in California history, and also it's probably its biggest unsolved mystery because he had disappeared about 20 years before, and she enlist Dash to help her solve what happened to her father. Because as the book begins, Ken Ironwood's bones have been discovered in a dried up lake slightly north of LA, and she wants to find out who killed him. So they end up driving out of LA and end up in a small town California mystery that involves wildfires. The local vineyard, which is run by an incredibly creepy rich dude, and a bunch of other, there's a nutso cop. So a lot of kind of noir and mystery tropes, but I tried to kind of provide my own flip on the classics, as it were.
Mhm.
But that's kind of the 75-second elevator pitch for it.
Yeah. But you kind of encapsulated quite a bit of California iconography
Mm,
in there. You've got vineyards, you've got wildfires, you've
mhm,
got
mhm,
LA.
mhm.
Um, can you, well, before I ask you that, was there an initial inspiration for the book?
Yeah, so by day, I'm a journalist, and right now I cover tech primarily for Morning Brew, which I don't know if anyone who's listening who's aware of it. Morning Brew is like Axios or The Hustle. It's a newsletter that goes out every morning to a couple million people, and I cover primarily tech. But back in the day, I was a celebrity interviewer
Mm.
and an entertainment writer. And so I live in New York, but I ended up in LA like sometimes two or three times a month, even to interview famous people and do stories along that line. And as I was there covering all those various stories, you end up inevitably talking to lawyers and photographers and all the below the line people who power the Hollywood machine. And you pick up stories that you can't use because they're complete hearsay and conjecture and whatnot.
Mm.
But they all ended up in my notebooks one way or the other. And I'd always intended to write kind of an LA Hollywood-esque mystery because, I love movies and I had all this whole repertoire of real life tales. So a lot of those real life tales kind of became the spine of this, and a lot of Dash's past history has kind of these true roots to them. But then, I wanted to take all of that of my past history and then graft it onto kind of a classic Hollywood, LA mystery, like the ones I grew up with. I mean, I like so many mystery writers. I grew up reading Chandler and McDonald and everybody else. And so I wanted to do my own flip on it, but I wanted to do a flip on it. I think a lot of mystery novels, kind of even contemporary ones, very, very closely mimic post-war mid-century conventions when it comes to mystery novels. I mean, the DNA is very deeply threaded in there, and I wanted to do something that kind of took it to kind of a more 21st century context. So there's a lot of, for example, there's wildfires lurking in the background constantly, and wildfire becomes a major plot element as the novel progresses. I want to talk about kind of toxic celebrity and everything that we've been sort of wrestling with as a culture over the last 10 or 15 years and filter it through this lens and kind of pay homage to a certain extent to classic noir and mystery tropes, but also hopefully advance it a little bit at the same time.
Yeah. Yes, I agree that this is updated noir. It still feels like it still has a lot of the elements of classic noir. So if you're a fan of that, you're not going to feel like this is a major departure, but it is updated and it feels like there are added elements to enhance the classic elements. So I appreciate that. It's always fun to see how authors put their own spin or take on classics, and I think Nick has done that with noir in this case. So we're going to go ahead and take our first break of this episode. When we come back, we'll be talking more about Dash as one of the main characters of this story. Stay tuned. You are tuned in to the GSMC Book Review Podcast, and I'll be right back.
I feel like I'm losing my mind. Is everybody in the world blind? Please, Lord, give me a sign, a sign. I feel like I'm losing my mind. Is everybody in the world blind? Please, Lord, give me a sign, a sign.
I wanna be the greatest. Everybody on the fake shit. I look around and feel like everybody is the fakest. I make this every day and I'm impatient, hoping one day I blow up from the basement. Statement, the top is so vacant. I don't hear shit that I think is amazing. Waiting for my day when I'm playing sold out shows for 1,000 faces. Hey, give me that crown, get in my way and to be put down. It ain't your place, all this my town. If I want that shit, then I'll get it right now. I'm losing it, the noose it fits, I'm losing shit. A stupid myth, you choose to live or choose to dip. You choose to fight or lose your grip and lose a gift.
I feel like I'm losing my mind. Is everybody in the world blind? Please, Lord, give me a sign, a sign. I feel like I'm losing my mind. Is everybody in the world blind?
Welcome back to the GSMC Book Review Podcast and my conversation with author Nick Kolakowski. As we get into this second segment, this is your second and final reminder that if you would like to help the podcast and the network as a whole in a monetary fashion, you can do so by going to gsmcpodcast.net. You see that in the video next to me, but you're also going to see it playing or scrolling along the bottom of the screen throughout the episode in case you would like a reminder. Again, that is gsmcpodcast.net. Again, all support is greatly appreciated. Thank you so much for past, present, and future support. I can't thank you enough. Before the break, Nick was talking about some of his inspirations and jumping off points for Where the Bones Lie. Let's go ahead and return to the conversation with Nick. Let's talk a little bit more about Dash and what about him do you think will resonate with readers?
He's funny. I mean, I tried to make him as funny as I could. He's flawed.
He's funny,
morally.
except that he's not funny. Sorry, I'm
Right.
just thinking he's a terrible stand-up, but he is actually funny.
Yeah, he's not. So he is a terrible stand-up, and his comedy is god awful. And when I was writing the book initially, I tried to actually make him like genuinely funny, and I realized that wasn't quite landed. So I made him a terrible stand-up comic. But the book is narrated from his perspective, and he's Ryan and amusing in his own way. But I think in terms of what draws him, certainly what drew me to him as a character, is he's morally flawed in very, very deep ways. And I think a lot, and but he wants to change and he wants to be better. And I think that urge to be better, in a lot of ways, the mystery at the center of this book gives him the opportunity to, if not wholly heal himself, at least kind of advance that healing a little bit. Um, I think a lot of people identify with that. I think a lot of people, we all recognize that we've made mistakes and so on. And I think a lot of people would like to do better or be better, and kind of try to fix themselves. And I think he appeals on that basis. I mean, certainly, like I said, he appeals to me as a character on that basis as well.
Right.
I certainly didn't want to do a detective who, I love reading mysteries and I read them constantly, but I also kind of get a little bit bored about the trope of like the 200 IQ genius detective who's, they've got like one conspicuous flaw, but it's not really a flaw, et
Hmm.
cetera. And they're pretty morally um whitewashed. I really didn't want that. I want somebody who is kind of messy in his own way. Same with Madeline as well. I mean, they're both messy and they both kind of help heal each other through the course of this mystery.
So, talk a little bit about writing characters who maybe are a little messy or morally gray, as in Dash's case, and where's that balance for you? For they could cross that line to being an unlikable character, but you want them to be your protagonist and not be. How do you find that balance?
So every time they came to a particular decision junction, like within the book, whether it was trying to figure out what to do with a particular clue or, drive down which road or kind of even broader moral and ethical decisions they make as they're trying to solve this mystery, I thought to myself, okay, what is sort of like the best worst decision they could make at this juncture? And I mean that whenever I was trying to put myself in Dash and Madeline's head, I was thinking, okay, like these are fundamentally moral people who are trying to do the right thing here by solving this mystery. But what's the worst possible decision they could make in terms of the outcomes, even if they don't mean to make the decision that way? Like and I also didn't want to make either of them dumb. They're very smart people, but I kept asking myself, like, okay, like what's the most flawed decision I can make here that's going to just make everything more complicated? And that's usually the option I chose because then that opens up other storytelling possibilities because now everything's even more borked than it was before. They need to somehow kind of dig themselves out of an even deeper hole as a result of that.
Did you ever find yourself as a writer feeling like whoa, that now I've dug myself into the hole. How are we going to get out of that?
Yeah, I abandoned the book for about 3 months because of that. As a
Okay.
result, like I was writing it, and about two, this is the first book I ever wrote based off an outline. I'm a pantser sort of writer, but I realized that when writing a traditional mystery, you need at least some sort of like structure outline going into it, or else you're going to have problems. You're going to end up, stuck in rewrite hell once you're kind of on the other side of it. So, um, my original outline, I got to a certain point in the book and realized that it wasn't resonating in the way that I really needed it to resonate, and like the plot points there weren't working, but wasn't sure what the alternative would have been. And so I stepped away from the book for about 3 months or so, um, and wrestled epically internally. And at one point I even thought about turning it into like a pseudo supernatural thriller, like kind of along the lines of what True Detective was sort of aiming towards in its first season a little bit, and the
Hmm.
fourth season as well, kind of playing with those elements. And that didn't work at all. So I decided to stick in reality. But um I'm not going to spoil anything, but there's a huge twist at the end that wasn't in my original draft, and I would like to claim credit and say that like I came up with that twist through some ingenious blah blah blah, and it just dropped in my head. And then after it dropped in my head, I went back to the book, and everything kind of aligned in a way it needed to align after that. So that's yeah, no, I definitely I these characters echo a lot of my personality in that sense too, where they kind of waffle over stuff and make bad decisions, but hopefully loop around and make the right ones. I mean, it's the writing process in a nutshell in a certain way.
Okay. So the book is told from Dash's perspective, but then we get the added element of Madeline's character. Can you talk a little bit about their relationship and how that dynamic works throughout the story?
Yeah, I wanted them to be the yin yang to each other. So Dash is methodical, he's careful, he's a little bit too anxious for his own good, whereas Madeline, also because of her past trauma, she had a father disappear, she had a really rough childhood, she's hasn't had the greatest adulthood either, quite frankly, but she tends to be impulsive. I mean, from everything in terms of like how she drives to, what she says to people and so on. She tends to kind of lead much more um impulsively than Dash does. And as a result of that, they complement each other in a weird way. There are times in the book where Dash will freeze up and try to think like, what do I do now? Madeline will plunge ahead and that will actually kind of free up whatever they need to free up to move forward. but it also kind of gets him into trouble at certain points. As the dangers in the book escalate and get more lethal, certainly Dash has ways, having come from a kind of a dark background, or he's dealt with similar situations. He tries to finesse his way through things, and Madeline, by shooting her mouth off, sometimes almost gets them killed. So I mean, I wanted to create a sense of them playing off each other personality wise, but also frankly, I mean, they both recognize, like I said before, that they're both flawed people. And one of my big hopes for the book was that, I mean, Madeline also evolves alongside Dash, and that, they're kind of using each other as a catalyst to heal their broken places at least a little bit. So there was that idea too, that they would do that. When I was writing, I also realized that, like, of usually all my previous novels had also been two-handers. I have this impulse to write, instead of having one main character, I have two, because then you can use action and dialogue, I think, much more organically to kind of work out character beats and so on. Whereas when you're entirely in the head of one protagonist, you risk kind of getting a little bit too internalized, especially if you're trying to trace out an emotional arc or something like that too. So I found, as I was writing this, I just had this realization where it's like, oh, this is the latest iteration, and probably the best iteration of, like, this constant theme that runs through everything I've ever written. So I thought that was interesting.
Yeah. You said you're a pantser when it comes to plot most of the time. Is that true for characters as well? Do you like them to just sort of evolve, maybe without you sometimes, or do you really like to have a good idea of them before you start writing?
I have a rough outline of what they are before I start writing, and then I think a lot of writers experience this. At a certain point, the characters start kind of talking to you in a certain way, which sounds, when writers use that phrase a lot, and I think it sounds a lot more supernatural or magical than it's actually supposed to. But at a certain point, there's something in your brain that kicks in, and then if you try to make a decision for them that the character, like, doesn't like, then they start to pull against you almost. It's hard to describe, or it doesn't feel right.
Right.
They start kind of taking a little bit more control. So yeah, I mean, I always kind of go in with an outline, but then sometimes characters will surprise me, and, like, something will suggest itself in terms of what they need to do or whatever, and then all of a sudden you're writing something completely different. Sometimes you have to toss out the outline or adjust what you think you were going to be doing with them. Yeah, and that certainly happened with this as well. I think Dash at certain moments was kind of a lot darker and a little bit older. And I think Madeline kind of went a little bit back and forth before she started to really kind of speak. But yeah, I think it definitely changes on you.
Always interesting to me when I talk to authors to find out how characters change, whether they kind of do it on their own or if it's actual, conscious decisions of, maybe I shouldn't say conscious, but you know what I mean, like decisions that the author deliberately makes, or sometimes the author feels like the characters kind of lead them in a way to change. But it's always interesting to hear how characters start out and then how they have evolve into the characters that we read in books, and how different it might be to read the book where the character was as originally written. Just kind of an interesting thought exercise for me, maybe for you too. I don't know. We're going to go ahead and take our next break of this episode. When we come back, we'll be talking about secondary characters and if they ever convince Nick to give them bigger roles in his writing. You're tuned in to the GSMC Book Review Podcast, and I'll be right back.
For the best and latest podcasts available anywhere, go to the podcast app on your cell phone and type in GSMC to access free content-rich podcasts on health and wellness, book reviews, sports, entertainment, relationships, social media, movies, technology, finance, and even weird news. Subscribe and download the GSMC Podcast Network's family of shows, available everywhere podcasts are found.
Welcome back to the GSMC Book Review Podcast and my conversation with author Nick Kolakowski. Before the break, Nick was talking about character development and how characters change and evolve through the writing process. Let's go ahead and return to that conversation with Nick. Do you ever have secondary characters that decide, nope, I need a bigger, have they ever kind of come forth as having more of a role than you originally intended?
Yeah, I get a lot of, so I tend to draw a lot from real life, and sometimes with secondary characters, like I'll fill them in with like tons of detail from somebody who I know or whatever, and then all of a sudden, because of that, they it's like almost too much life has been pumped into them, and then they become like they tend to fill a little bit more. And then conversely, there's the other side of it too, where sometimes you have a secondary character who's threatening to take too much of a role. And frankly, in previous books, there's been times where I've killed secondary characters who were risking like kind of taking too much of the spotlight or whatever because I recognized that it was going to be like I envisioned this like future issue of like trying to rewrite a book, with this character being a
Right.
little bit too loudly, and I'm like, okay, we're gonna kill him now. So,
So warning to secondary characters, don't get
right,
too
you know
uppity,
what?
I'll kill
Yeah,
you.
yeah. No, don't exceed your bounds. And with like mystery and thriller fiction, the great thing is that like there's no end of opportunities for that kind of thing too. So.
Right. Did you do any particular research that stood out for you for this book?
I did a lot of forensic reading because, like I said, this is California's most notorious missing persons case, and they discover her father's bones in a barrel, and so I did a lot of research into that. I did a lot of research into um one of the inspirations for this story was also one of the elements that ended up getting incorporated in everything was how, as climate change has sort of seized the West, especially around like Lake Tahoe and Nevada, you've seen these like declining water levels, that
Mhm.
have surface bodies and barrels, from like the 70s or the 80s or whatever. And so I did a little bit of a dive into that. And then um, there's a huge action sequence in this book involving wildfire. So I did a little bit of research into that. Although, I mean, I've also personally witnessed wildfires out of control,
Mhm.
in Arkansas, in Idaho, and in California. So I knew a little bit about that going in, but I dug up my notes on fire science, for example, just to get some things right. At
Yeah.
one point, I actually did a story where I was embedded with the California firefighters for a little bit. So yeah, no, I mean every book. I mean, you always have three Google tabs open on everything.
Right.
Yeah, so
But again, the internet history of authors never ceases to amaze me. And if somebody who didn't know you was an author, somebody who didn't know you are an author stumbled across your internet history, they might be
mhm.
very confused.
It's the funny thing too. It's like you have to, and the other thing too is like you have to get it right. I mean, there's so many of my friends who are mystery authors and so on where they get. I've gotten these letters too, where I mean, if you, especially with guns, I mean, if you
Mhm.
mess up with small details on things, like you will get notes from readers, and like the notes are fine, the notes are pleasant, most of the time, but like you really have to get it right because I mean, there's a lot of very smart people out there, and they'll let you know it if
Yeah.
like you mess something up.
My dad was not a wildland firefighter, but a volunteer firefighter in my
Mhm.
hometown for decades, and he could not watch movies with firefighters because they so often got things wrong, and it just made him so angry.
Yeah. Yeah, I can see. I've got a similar thing with friends of mine who have worked in ERs, and so whenever they see any TV show or movie that's like, except for that show on HBO, The Pit, which apparently is very realistic, but like otherwise, like they can't watch medical shows or movies with medical sequences because it drives them berserk.
Right. Yeah, you get so angry. Um, would you go back to these characters in this universe? Do you think would this be the start of a series
Mhm.
potentially?
Yep, I submitted the outline in the first several chapters to my editor, and now it's kind of like a fingers crossed if the first book is selling sort of situation right now. So we'll see. I mean, I have places to take them, emotionally, physically, and so on. A lot of it, the way that this book ends, I felt, and I deliberately ended it on kind of a note that would set it up potentially for a series involving these characters. And there's, knock on wood, there's a lot more room for them to expand. So I'm hopeful. I'm excited.
Okay. Yeah. What draws you to writing not only crime fiction, but in this case, noir?
Mhm. That's a good question. I started at I think it's because like from a young age, my dad gave me, he when I was about 10 or so, he started pulling like Chandler and Hammett books off the shelf and giving them to read. And I just fell in love with the genre then, and we watched a lot of growing up. We watched like a ton of the old classic like film noirs with Bogart and everybody else. And I think that just kind of instilled it in me. I've never I've dabbled in a lot of other genres like sci-fi and contemporary literature and so on, and I've written and published some stuff in those genres. But this is the thing, you just have like an emotional drive for it. I think it's kind of it's rooted deeply in my childhood. I think it's yeah, I think it's just as simple as that.
Yeah, makes sense.
Yeah.
Um, in terms of writing, obviously you're a journalist, so you write all the time in that capacity, but what did you always want to write fiction, write for publication, or did that decision come later in life?
I always had the urge to write fiction and write novels. And I wrote in my 20s, I wrote a couple of novels which are now firmly trunked and will never see the light of day, which were
Mhm.
not awful. But I think everybody's got a couple of trunk novels in them. And then when I hit my 30s, I decided that I was going to bear down on it a little more and make sure that like whatever the subsequent books were didn't end up in the trunk. So I mean, I've always constantly, I mean, I've always been somebody who wrote at night and so on, and consistently my entire life. At just at a certain point, I think after you've trunked enough books and kind of filled enough notebooks and made some progress, but not a lot of progress, I think you make a decision either to give it up or lock down. And I just made a decision to kind of like lock down a little more on it. And also your skills improve. So you
Mhm.
start getting slightly fewer rejection notes and so on. And then, you build up relationships and you start working with editors. And then you're kind of on a smoother glide path as a result of that.
Yeah. From your own experience, what piece of advice would you give to someone who's kind of at that point? They think, yeah, I do want to try to do this more consistently.
I think it's the same advice that was given to me, which is just steady work. You just have to keep there's no I mean, I'm sure there are geniuses out there who have managed to put pen to paper at a young age and just, kind of blasted something out on the first draft, which is absolutely perfect. I mean, I think for all the rest of us, it's just hard work. And then there's no it's like any vocation, there's no shortcuts. You just got to grind. And, you've got to the other thing that's important too, though, is to I think read heavily and read outside of your genre. Like I read a lot of mystery and thrillers, but it's probably about maybe a quarter of my overall consumption. And I think that for everybody else, I think it's really important to read a lot of nonfiction. Like if you whatever your genre is, make sure you read other genres. Read whatever's kind of blowing up contemporary literature and winning the National Book Award. And I think once you have to be really omnivorous because you never know kind of how your brain is going to digest things. It's operating on a subconscious level that I think you can't really recognize or sort of consciously handle. And I think as you digest and absorb more stuff, you're not going to even realize it consciously, but it's going to start coming out in your writing. I think the more you read, the better a writer you become, whether or not you recognize that or not.
Yeah. The more you read, the better writer you become. I tend to agree with that. And if that's the case, then in theory, I should be a really, really good writer if I was a writer, because I do love to read and I try to read fairly broadly. Definitely read more broadly since starting this podcast and doing hundreds of episodes with authors that I maybe wouldn't have had the opportunity to read if it weren't for doing this exact thing. So grateful for that. But, I haven't tested that theory as if to whether my reading a lot throughout my life would make me a better writer, because I don't really write, as you know. Maybe someday. Not the time or the place to have that conversation. We are going to take our next break of this episode. When we come back, what is Nick reading in his spare time? You're tuned in to the GSMC Book Review Podcast, and I'll be right back. Welcome back to the GSMC Book Review Podcast and my conversation with Nick Kolakowski. And somebody has decided that up here is where he wants to be. So say hello if you want to be in the podcast. No licking. Welcome back to my conversation. Before the break, Nick was talking about advice that he would give to someone who wants to write. We're going to now return to the conclusion of my conversation with Nick. So in that other 3/4 time when you're not reading mystery or crime, who are some of your favorite genres and some of your favorite authors and genres?
So I read a ton of nonfiction, and I've been actually plowing through Emily Wilson's. Well, this isn't nonfiction. I got those two threads confused, but her Emily Wilson's recent interpretations of the Odyssey and the Iliad are two things that I just kind of reread, which were amazing. I mean, I haven't read them since I was, kind of a teenager, and they were both absolutely kind of incredible. I'm reading Ghosts of Hiroshima right now, which is a nonfiction book by Charles. I'm going to say Pellegrino, but that's wrong. It's being adapted into a movie by James Cameron right now. It's about obviously the horrific atomic bombings of Hiroshima and Nagasaki, but also focuses on one particular guy who survived being at the epicenter of the Hiroshima bombing and went home to Nagasaki and then got bombed in Nagasaki as well, and kind of the repercussions through his family, because he lived through both. So it's like kind of the repercussions through his family and so on. I just got done reading The Fort Bragg Cartel, which is another nonfiction book by this Rolling Stone author who alleges that Delta Force and a bunch of other special forces groups have been trafficking heroin through Afghanistan ever since the War on Terror began. It's a really deeply researched, kind of terrifying book in a lot of ways. Just given how, like, there's a whole criminal justice system that doesn't apply, according to him, to like a certain swath of society.
Right.
Yeah, so those are kind of the things that I've been reading lately in terms of it's a lot of nonfiction. In terms of fiction, I just got done reading, or I'm almost done reading Lou Barney's Double Barrel Bluff, which is a crime thriller that's set in Thailand, which is really amazing.
Mm-hmm.
He's an incredible writer. And then in terms of fiction books that aren't falling into genre, what was the name of that German author? I was reading this German book in translation. It's called Kroll. It's by this author named Marcus Kallenholz, which is it's a medieval book, or it's set during the medieval era. It's about a court jester who goes from village to village and ends up like it's sort of this satire of European medieval politics. It's fun. It's a really fun book.
Okay.
So anyway, that's I always have, like, I mean, I think this is a side effect of having like a toddler running around, a full-time job, etc. It's like you sort of nip and graze on books. Like you have like 4 or 5 going at the same time, and then like it seems like you're reading very slowly, but actually you're just reading 5 books at once. So
Right.
yeah.
Speaking of the toddler, are you reading with her?
So the Grumpy Monkey series with Chimpanzee. If anyone who's familiar with those, they involve the titular grumpy monkey who is named Chimpanzee, who every book learns a message or learns a lesson about sharing or about patience or about not freaking out when when things don't turn out the way that you want. I love the illustrations. They're kind of very Bill Watterson. They look a little bit Calvin and Hobbesy.
Mm.
And the lessons are fun, and they're also pretty short. So for bedtime, you can like plow through 2 or 3 of them and still kind of keep everything running on time in terms of
Right.
that. But we love those books. Also, like the God, I feel like there's so many books where you just sort of there's so many classes you kind of just end up rote memorizing them. So you kind
Mm-hmm.
of go through that. We've also
Mm-hmm.
been reading They All Saw a Cat, which was won a whole ton of awards. It's a beautifully illustrated book about a cat
Mm-hmm.
um, who is walking through the woods and is seen by like the earthworm and the bird and so on. That author has a bunch of cat themed children's books, which we also really love. So yeah, and I mean, it's also I'm trying to get the toddler as omnivorous as possible too.
Yeah, absolutely.
Yeah.
Um, People want to know more about you and the books. You've got a website, so tell us your website and any social media that you're active on.
Mhm. It's nickkolakowski.com. Um, is the website, which and Nick Kolakowski is also my Instagram handle and the Twitter handle, I think, where I used to be much more of a Twitter poster, not so much anymore, but I definitely check in on my DMs and so on constantly. If people want to reach out, is N Kolakowski. Um, yeah, those are the platforms I'm primarily active on. But I mean, my website has all the usual breakdowns of all the books and the handy contact form and all the rest of that. So yeah, I know if people want to give me a note about whether I got something wrong or not, I would love to field that and hopefully tweak it in a subsequent edition.
Okay. Nick, is there anything that we haven't talked about that you want to make sure you cover or highlight?
No, this has been great. I think we've touched on everything. I think if fans of traditional mysteries, I think hopefully you'll dig where the bones lie. Fingers crossed that there's going to be a sequel.
Yes, absolutely. Well, thank you
Yeah.
so much for taking time out of your day and out of your weekend to talk to me. I really appreciate it.
Yeah, no, thank you. Thank you for this. This was lovely. Great questions.
Thank you again to Nick for joining me for this conversation. Thank you, I guess, to this dog who keeps deciding that he needs to stand hovering behind me. Oh, and growl. Oh, now I've made him angry. Now he's growling. I don't know if you can hear him. Actually, he's not angry at me. He's angry at the baby who's also behind the curtain, probably tormenting him. Beside the point. Thank you so much to Nick for joining me for this conversation to talk about where the bones lie and writing. If you're a fan of noir, then definitely check this out. If you're a fan of mystery, check this out. He's got other books as well. Spooky season is coming up, and some of you are not like me. You like the horror side of Halloween, where I like the whimsical horror of Halloween, but even I am intrigued by the book that he mentioned at the beginning, the name of which is escaping me, but it has Slay in the title. Oh shoot! But no, I want to look that up because the Groundhog Slay. That even to me sounds darkly hilarious. So I want to look more into that. But if you are a fan of noir, if you are a fan of mysteries, if you are just a fan of seeing how authors rework kind of classic genres to make them more their own, then definitely check out Where the Bones Lie by Nick Kolakowski. Thank you for joining me for this episode. I hope that you will join me for the next episode when I will be talking to author Victoria Dowd about her book, Death in the Aviary. We are sticking with death and murder and mayhem. We have another mystery. This one, historical mystery, though. We are going back in time for this. I'm looking forward to talking to Victoria and hope that you will join me for that conversation. In the meantime, of course, if you are a fan of this podcast, please do a few things, or some of these few things, all of them, some of them, anything helps. Like, follow, and subscribe on whatever platform you're either listening to or watching this episode on. Again, helps the algorithm, gets the podcast out to more readers. Something else that really helps the algorithm is to leave a positive review. It doesn't have to be complicated. One sentence is great. Starred review, great. It depends on what platform you're leaving that on, but it really, really does help. And also leave those reviews for your favorite authors. Those reviews help get their books out to more people who maybe have never heard of those authors. So if you love a book, leave it a review. And don't be like me. Don't overthink it. It doesn't have to be complicated. It can just be, hey, this is what I really liked about this book. Positive reviews do help. So positive reviews help this podcast as well. Also, if you are on social media, you can follow the podcast on Facebook, X, TikTok, Instagram, and Blue Sky. Love hearing from you. Find the podcast. By extension, you get me. Hit me up with questions. Let me know your comments. Have you read the books of the authors I have spoken to? Have you been inspired to read any of the books of the authors I have spoken to? Does my growling dog annoy you during episodes? Come find me. Tell me your thoughts. Love hearing from you. So follow the podcast on social media on the platforms listed. I hope you're having a great day. I hope that you are having a great week so far. It's only Tuesday, but I am so confused as to what day it is because I worked over the weekend. So that always I never quite know what day it is. I had a really busy day on Sunday. Long story for why I had so many lessons on Sunday. Not important, but my brain is confused. I keep thinking it's later in the week. So I'm actually really glad that I remembered that it's Tuesday and got this episode out for you. But whatever's going on, whether you're confused about the day or you know exactly what day it is. I hope your week is going well. Regardless if you know what day it is, I hope that you are finding plenty of time to get yourself lost in a good book. Thank you so much, and I will see you next time.
Let's go. I wake up to a little bit of drool on my pillow, feel like it's gonna be a bad day. Yeah, I'm tired of shit, and the coffee ain't hit yet, damn, ain't that great. I don't wanna go to